Officially welcome to the 6th event of Entangled Life, a program that brings together the community talking about climate action, art, and how all of this is connecting with the community. We have fantastic guests, and you have, before forgetting, so there are these folders in which inside there is the information about this event, information about our guests, there is the calendar, and there is some white paper, there are pens if you want to take notes. Give me feedback, that is amazing, having feedback, and I'm going to introduce our guests in alphabetical order. And I will start with Viviana Checchia, that is a curator and programmer, researcher and active internationally, and currently director of Art Center in Derry, where she instigated a living practice of social permaculture. Viviana is also co-director of Vessel, an international curatorial platform based in Puglia, south of Italy, for the support of social, cultural, economic development through contemporary art. Other posts include the residency curator at the Delphina Foundation in London, senior lecturer on the MFA at the HDK Valland University of Gothenburg, and public engagement curator at the Contemporary Art Glasgow. Viviana has produced and contributed to a range of international projects, including the Young Artist of the Year Award in Ramallah and the 4th Athens Biennale. Viviana is lecturer in curatorial studies and contemporary art practice, and amongst other, the Center of Curatorial Studies, Bard College, New York, and the International Academy of Art Palestine, Ramallah. Thank you. And we have Vanya Lambrecht is a visual artist and social sculptor with a social and sculptural practice whose research focuses on perception, decay, relationships with space, place, and environment. Her work explores what leaves a mark, what remains as a waste, and what we are made and remade of using a variety of media. By exploring fungal thinking, she investigates invisible and often intangible lines of relation, viewing waste and detritus as a site of potential and persistent life. These models offer alternative ways of thinking, relating, and being. These models of connection serves as a pathway for contemplating our relationship with our surroundings and cycles, aiding in the creation of new narratives and methodologies. Practically, these encounters and deliberation manifest in diverse forms, including drawing, paper, found and made materials, sculpture, social interaction, walks, talks, discussion, inks, digital media, books, and installation. Vanya grew up in The Hague in the Netherlands and lived in Ireland since 1996, where she completed a degree in Fine Art 2009, Architecture 2018. She has a Master in Art and Contemporary Work from the NCAD 2011. She currently lives in Sligo, where she lectures in Fine Art and YAADA? Yeah. And ATU Sligo. And we have Siobhan Mooney, is an independent curator and producer based between Dublin and Kerry. Her curatorial, sorry, my glasses are really falling. Her curatorial practice explored themes of place, memory, and traditional Irish folklore through the lens of ecology and climate crisis, examining how environmental and cultural narratives intersect with contemporary art. Siobhan is currently a co-director of Basic Space and has been the open call curator at the Earth Rising Festival in Niamh for the past 4 years. Recent curatorial projects includes co-curating the periodical review 12 at the Pallas Projects studios, Welcome to the Fire Station at the Fire Station Art Studio, and Siobhan has a BA in English and Art History from the UCC and MA in Visual Artist Practice Curating Pathway from the IADT, and presently undertaking a Diploma of Art and Ecology at the NCD. Thank you for coming. And we have Katherine Sankey. Is an Irish settler Australian artist born in Paris and based in Dublin, working primarily in sculpture, installation, which deals with the fragile intersection of body, environment, and infrastructure. How planetary and human constructed systems connect with an impact our own anatomies and psychologies. Sankey's project grapples with decolonizing and reterritorializing matter and signification, researching both physically and through diving into the discourse of such thinkers as Karen, I'm sorry, I thought I lost the line. Karen Barad, Catherine Yusuf, and Lynn Margulis. Interrogating the position of human on the planet through a geoqueering discourse, Katherine Sankey's artwork occupy a liminal space between decay and adaptation, dynamically inhabiting the exhibition environment. They navigate disturbance, repair, and multi-species resistance. The upcoming solo, Forest of a Single Breath, at the College Lane Gallery Out, Dublin. Curator is Jobs Gravy, from the 6th of September to 9th of December, if you want to go. And we have Niamh Schmidtke, born in Dublin 1997. Is an artist and lecturer of art facilitator based across London and Limerick. They explore the politics of greenwashing, economic jargon, and the language of democracy through speculation, audio, ceramic installation, centering intimacy as a form of the colonial praxis. They examine the relationship between listening and speaking to consider the kinds of voice that deep time, the sea, and or human could have with one another. They currently lecture on the School of Architecture Limerick with the MFA from Goldsmith, London, and BA from LSAD. Awards include Agility Awards, Material Future Residency at Cove Park, Scotland, European Investment Bank Artistic Development Fund. They are exhibited across Ireland and internationally, including Tulka, Salvage Agency, Galway 2024, Pulling Blood from Stone Solo, Science Gallery Belling 2024, DARE, or DARE 2019, Orpheus Institute, Belgium, and Paul's Limerick City Gallery 2022. Their work is held in public and private collections, including EIB's permanent collection, and they are member of Lewis Show. Art House Artist Co-op, where they co-organize the Graduate Award with Sarah Willett. And since 2021, they are founded and developed Future Artifact FM radio project with Nina Davis and Rebecca Edwards. Thank you. Last but not least, Kate Strain is a founder and CEO and artist director of the Kunstverein project CLG, and in 2022, Strain established the Kunstverein Aughrim as a curatorial production office that accompanies artist practice through creative production. From 2016 to 2021, Strain was artistic direction at the Grazer Kunstverein in Austria, and Strain collaborates on the curatorial research and commissioning project RGK-SK-SRG with Rachel Gilbourne and the Department of Ultimology with Fiona Hallahan. Thank you very much for coming. It seems long, but it's important to say all of this. And I'm starting with a question for each of you. This is a microphone.
Okay.
And to give, of course, the opportunity to talk about each and every one projects, and specifically some questions. That is the first question of the evening. Things will be said, so if things are in your mind, write down questions. There is space and time to discuss. I'm starting with Viviana, and I will start with a question focused on the social permaculture that somehow is the what you even put in your bio. So in your work on social permaculture, you approach institution as a living system, cultivating sustainable and independent systems with curatorial practice. Yet, cultural infrastructure often operate with rigid hierarchy and carbon-intensive models. So on one side, did you encounter limitation in trying to embed ecological ethics in the institutional realities, and how the compromise goes? And on the other side, how do you see institution evolving in nurturing a living ecosystem rather than simply hosting climate-related discourse and avoiding tokenism? And of course, if you can talk about your practice and programs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So first of all, I would like to say thank you to Pallas and to Christina for the invite and for being here, and for all of you to actually gather tonight. I hope you can hear my voice. I have a very awful cough, so if anybody wants to wear a mask, I would recommend. But it's going around in Northern Ireland, so I was not exempted. So I'll try my best, but if all of a sudden I need to stop talking, it's just for that, because I will explode in my coughing. Before I even answer to your question, I would just like to check the pulse of the room, if that's okay. Don't be shy. Can you please raise your hands if you are absolutely not familiar with permaculture? The rest is fantastic. So just briefly to say, is a discipline that is generally used to design landscape and gardening. It's a sort of way of thinking and working and operating that first and foremost will start from what is on the site and the respect of what is on the site. And then it develops over time. It's actually very, very slow. It's based on 3 pillars, which are health care, people care, and fair share, and on 11 principles. And the principles are, I would say, very easy. Like, you would probably already use it in your life and you don't even know, but it's like observe and interact. So before you even come to a conclusion of what to do on a site, you really need to observe what is happening. Or the idea of catching and store energy, like we cannot constantly just produce energy or accumulate energy or demand energy, but there are moments in which we need to rest. So I would say it's quite common sense if you look at the principles, but someone had his thinking of recreating it as a proper discipline, and then over time this was transformed into a set of ideas and principles that can be used also for humans, not just for a landscape or for gardening. And the application of those ideas to human beings is called social permaculture. And this is what we have been testing, experimenting at Void Art Center in Derry since 2024. And it has been a very slow transition. We started with coaching with all the team, trying to understand what are our values, because again, it's very people-centered. After the coaching, we went into some training, so we were all trained into how is that we can apply social permaculture. And then we actually structured the way in which we live within the organization. What I'm saying, does it sound to total, I don't know how to say, it's super metaphorical and difficult to apply, or you can get an idea of what I'm suggesting. Great. So Christina also mentioned that if we had any books of any reference that we would like to use to bring it with us, and so I did. So I can pass it around. Can you? Yes. Too many things. Great. So I brought with me 2 books. One is a reference for anybody that would like to actually apply social permaculture. And just so you know, you could use social permaculture in your work as an art practitioner. You can use social permaculture as a teacher. It's something that is totally adaptable to your practices. And then the other book, which for me is almost a Bible at the moment. I suppose you're all very familiar with the author of this book. But the interesting thing is the alternative thinking that is coming and the examples of ecofeminism that you can find in the book. So I will just pass it around in case you want to have a look at what is in it. But Louis McMara, the author of Cultural Emergence, would be like the guru of the application of social permaculture, if you are ever interested in understanding how that works. For us, it means that we are trying to make a shift from working with nature to working as nature. So the projects that we would be interested in, they don't need by default to be about the climate emergency or ecology. They don't need to substantially tick the boxes of the decreasing of carbon footprint and the sustainability agenda and all the rest of it, because in our opinion, that's pretty much what is used and abused in order to practice the usual same, rather than a transformation in the art system. And therefore, to pretend we are tackling something which is not with us, but is out of us, is happening over there. Something is there, and we, as art practitioners, are going to represent it. So we are not interested in that, because it's more about how we embrace this transformation and how we start to acknowledge that we are nature, and we are organisms that need somehow to renaturalize as well, because within the industrialization of our city and the recreation of an artificial art system based on all sorts of capitalist and neoliberal agendas, we have disconnected from nature. And by the way, these are not my ideas. These are things that you can find around the Great Turning or the understanding of the shift in this new ecological understanding of the world. So we have been disconnecting from nature somehow, and now we are trying badly to reconnect. And in our ideas, that will not happen just by making some exhibitions that are about nature, but it will only happen if we can really change substantially our modus operandi. So to the question about what are exactly the, let's say, limitations or resistance that we encountered because of the hierarchy of the arts, I would say that the hierarchy of the arts in itself is not the problem. Obviously, it's very difficult to get funding when you are trying to advocate for something that doesn't correspond to the sort of focuses of the different grants, and that are most of the time about sustainability and climate change, but as a representation mood rather than a transformative system. So that is certainly a limitation, but I would say that the most important limitation is the fact that even we want to admit it or not, we are really embedded in a way of living and in a modus operandi that is somehow related to a mainstream or an idea of the arts that is very easy, let's say that is very difficult to dismantle. So I would say the most difficult barrier for us is like the shift in culture. And it's not even the shift in culture in the general public, it's the shift in culture within us, the art system, the people that are part of this system. So I'll give you an example. Obviously, we are advocating for non-novelty. Like, we don't constantly need new things to be created, therefore no constant new commissions and no constant investment in new creation. This doesn't sound, I would say, very well for most people involved in the arts. And is one thing already that is difficult to change, the mentality of it, because everything needs to be new, which would take us to an exponential growth. It's impossible that we create so many new things forever and ever and ever. But I would say that the trickiest one is the exhibition. So it seems like the system has been recreated in this modus operandi in which we constantly need to create exhibitions. So I will kind of translate this into a social permaculture metaphor. If we just keep creating exhibitions, is a monocultural system that we are creating, where we are offering to the artists more of the same, which is most of the time not very sustainable. So in order to change that, we need to really advocate for a world that is not based on this monoculture. That starts from the art school, where teachers and people involved in teaching would need to explain to their students, not just explain in a sort of top-down, like share the idea that maybe you are not just an artist if you reach a white cube. There are so many ways of being an art practitioner. So there are many. If you open the Pandora box of the limitation of our internal culture, is endless. But I just gave you an idea to express like one of the, I would say, main boundaries or main limitations for us to really activate the shift. To the second part of the question, where you're asking how is that you would invite, let's say, organizations to really transform for a different ecosystem, perhaps more based in the principles we believe in. So first of all, I don't think that this is applicable to everybody. Again, to have a healthy ecosystem, you need different things. So we need diversity. So perhaps it's still important for some people to really just concentrate on new commission. They can do it. Or for some people to just concentrate on delivering activities for teenagers, whatever that is. But if anybody is interested in changing the system from the real ground that belongs to us, not the ground that belongs to the farm and to the community allotment, but to our ground, the art ground, then yeah, I would say that the first thing we can do is to start to advocate for this change, start to understand how we speak clearly to younger generation, but also to people involved in academia for these values and this understanding of what it really means to cohabit in ecosystem, the ecosystem of the arts. So the advocacy would be the most important thing, rather than hoping that everybody is going to align to this transformative phenomenon of working more as nature rather than with nature. I hope I answered to your question. And that's me for now. And should I pass the mic, I suppose?
Yes, to your neighbor. Thank you very much. I'm sure that this is a lot of food for thoughts, and of course on the same kind of on the same line, but in a different perspective. Well, I have a question. I would like you to give a context of your work and for understanding my question. Not to you, to everybody else, why I'm asking this. As a continuation of what Viviana just said, basically. Curating in the climate era demands both experimentation and accountability, yet real sustainability often conflict with demands of production, visibility, and growth. How do you negotiate those structural contradictions in your work? And is there a space for a refusal within the curatorial advocacy? And given the experience in different institutions, what kind of advocacy or structural change do you think is most needed in support of a sustainable practice today, especially considering your experience?
Got it.
Yeah, I know, sorry. But you are here, we need to catch everything from everybody, possibly.
Thanks so much, and thanks, Viviana, and thank you for inviting me. I feel like a total fraud here. I don't think about the climate all the time. I'm not that climate conscious. I don't have a climate crisis related Bible in my life. And I started thinking about how I could possibly answer this question, and I kept thinking, but I'm just a normal person. And I went back thinking over in the way the question asks about, in my experience of working with institutions. And so I thought a little bit about my trajectory and thought about the first thing I ever curated, which was a little intimate, about this many people, acoustic night in a place called Thomastown in a pub, and it was called Lights Off, and it was on International Earth Day, and the idea was we'd all light candles and we'd sit around listening to acoustic musicians and think about the earth. And I think it was 20 years ago, oh my God. And to advertise it, we figured out how many people lived in Thomastown, and we printed that many letters, and we put a letter through every single door. And we asked local businesses to be with us on the night and turn their lights off. And we got replies from pubs and Chinese restaurants saying, no. And we got a lot of feedback saying the amount of ink you've used on printing these letters and the amount of trees that have been cut down for the paper that you needlessly posted these. And it got me thinking, from that very first moment of the first thing I ever curated, that it was destructive, but also that it raised awareness, and that there was a moment where it didn't matter that I wasted a lot of paper asking people to turn their lights off on that night. What mattered was now people had that thought cross their pathway. And so I guess from there, there has been a kind of environmental or ecological consciousness to my work, only because there is one to every person's daily life and practice. At that time in Thomastown, I was living with a vegan, and at that time in Ireland, we didn't know what vegans were. And we started running a vegan cafe from our house. And we lived in an old mill, Canis's Mill, probably lots of people know it. And the vegan cafe was on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and people paid what they liked. And somebody christened it the Credit Crunch Cafe, and we kept the name because it was so nice. Now looking back, I can sort of think about the Credit Crunch Cafe as a kind of an institution. And at the time we were completely blind, didn't know what we were doing, naively just practicing, putting one foot in front of the other, putting sustainable, organic, ecologically sourced from a local Camp Hill vegan food on people's tables, and raising awareness accidentally about this kind of way of life and this kind of commitment. It helped that the girl I was living with was Dutch, completely committed to never flying in her life, and a member of an organisation called Plain Mad, which was my first taste of activism. And we had some very funny banner drops in Dublin Airport. So that was I guess, 20 years ago, my first sort of experience of where programming meets a kind of ecological consciousness in a way that feels very natural and seamless. And I don't think that's left my sense of curatorial practice. After Thomastown, I studied with amazing Amanda on a program called MAVIS, Masters in Visual Arts Practice, to learn how to do curating. And after various international programs where I learned how to do it more and better, I ended up being the artistic director of a place called Kunstverein in Austria. And I was artistic director there for 5 years, 1 year of which was COVID. So we won't talk about that. It's kind of a non-year. But when I was there, my partner at the time stayed in Ireland, continued to live here. And so I was living in Austria, in Graz, and traveling back and forth monthly, at least 4 flights a month, I would say, which I naturally felt incredibly guilty about, but also sort of thought, that's how I can do this. That's how it's feasible, and that's how it can work. And I kind of carried a lot of guilt about the amount of flying that I was doing. And it wasn't just flying to see my partner, it was also flying to do studio visits with artists. We wanted and felt like we needed to have an international program, so I had to attend exhibitions that were important and go to biennials and play the kind of role in the art sphere and in our landscape that felt warranted. But I had guilt. And to offset the guilt, I commissioned a local energy studio to do an energy audit of Grazer Kunstverein. And my thinking was that if we could figure out how much energy we were using, we could kind of figure out a way to offset it that was maybe like lovely and creative. And then I wouldn't have to feel so guilty about my grocery shopping in the airport and my 2 flights a month or whatever it was, 2 flights, sometimes 2 flights a week. So we did this energy audit, and we also bought a piece of land with an artist called Elizabeth von Samsonov, who's a very big ecofeminist. And we didn't buy a full piece of land, but it sounds really good to say that. We sponsored the purchase of a plot of land that she wanted to rewild and use for a very nice project. And we commissioned this energy audit. And I remember speaking to somebody at the time who said, what's the energy audit going to do? You already know that you use energy. The energy audit will tell you how much, but is it really going to have a huge impact? And I was making the argument that if we can clearly establish how much energy we're consuming, then we can figure out where the best ways to cut it are and how we can most practically address the problem. And one thing that troubled me about this idea of taking personal responsibility for the climate crisis, or feeling like there should be an onus on individuals to change, use bamboo toothbrushes and divide their recycling with a level of thoroughness that is impossible. That idea and that narrative that the onus should be on the individual really bugged me, and I thought was a little bit useless and sort of doomful. But I wasn't an individual. I was the director of a small art institution, and I felt very strongly that if a small art institution of 5 people that takes up 500 square meters can get a real grasp of and understand the amount of energy it consumes, the number of flights it takes to have our international program, how much energy it takes to light and heat a 500 square meter building, if we can get a good understanding of that, and in a year, for example, change that for the better, then we can legitimately ask bigger institutions to do the same. And if we can ask bigger institutions to do that because we're a case study for how it can be done, then we can also bring it further and ask industry to make changes. So this was the kind of idealistic goal, that we're doing this energy audit. It's not really going to tell us anything we don't know, but at least it'll demonstrate that there are changes we can make that have an impact, and that at scale, those changes can be more meaningful and more impactful. And it can be a kind of a challenge, or the word is escaping me, but does anyone have it?
Provocation?
Yeah, a provocation to bigger institutions to up their game and take it seriously, and maybe make changes that would be easy to make, that'll have some kind of impact. And at least we're thinking about it, and at least we're talking about it. And yes, maybe an energy audit isn't that important, but we're still talking about it. So that's a step that I took at Grazer Kunstverein, which I felt proud of. But then COVID happened, and all the flights landed, and nobody could move anywhere. And it was a dream in loads of ways. Also horrible time, terrible time. But I guess that sort of really exploded my idea of what's possible, seeing that actually it can stop. All the energy can stop. And people just running around and being busy the whole time and not having capacity can stop. And yes, it takes a global pandemic and absolute craziness, but all that stuff doesn't have to happen. And that was a huge kind of psychological shift for me during COVID. I also happened to get pregnant and have a baby during that time, which was another huge psychological shift for me. But I guess it taught me things like the value of time and the necessity not just the possibility to slow down, but the necessity to slow down, and to carry that through into program and into institution building and into your relationships with artists and people and how you work. And so then that brings me to, we would just bypass a project called Ultimology, where I work with Fiona Hallinan, who's based most of the time in Brussels. Next week she's defending her PhD thesis, thinking about ultimology as a pedagogical tool. Ultimology is a word that we invented, and it just means the study of endings. So it started as the study of things that are dead or dying, and kind of evolved to become the study of endings. And it's a discipline that she's like instituting and developing. And the main idea of it is to think about the end of something before it even begins. So to have the ending be a kind of consistent present in how you develop thoughts and strategy and practice, and in your everyday practice. And it really is transformative. It changes the way that I approach things, and it changes the way that I think about projects, the way that I think about the longevity of the life cycle of a project, or the strategic plan for a certain amount of time, how things can or should wind up, and the importance of endings not as full stops, but as moments of transformation and cyclical change. So that's ultimology. So in the background, that sort of non-institutional thing, but maybe that kind of theoretical or abstract or academic idea that Fiona is developing kind of informs lots of the way I practice, and gives me a further permission for refusal. Because in your question, you're asking if it's possible to refuse in a space that is driven by productivity and newness and developments. So then I'll come to Kunstverein Aughrim, which is a curatorial production office that I established on the ground floor building of a townhouse that I also live in. You were there. In Aughrim in County Wicklow. And in 2022, actually around this time in 2022, so it's 3 this month. And Kunstverein Aughrim started as an extension of my own kind of personal curatorial practice, and a sort of learning from what I experienced in Graz into what I wanted to bring into a new way of working or a new practice. Am I going over time or anything?
Continue speaking.
So Kunstverein Aughrim, as a curatorial production office, works with 3 artists a year, and I feel that that is a kind of number of artists that I have capacity to work with. It's me as a curator working with 3 artists a year, and we build sort of durational relationships, and I try to work in a way that's responsive, where I use the term accompany the practice of these artists, thinking about their work, their futures, their strategic planning, the life cycles of their works, their back catalogue and archives, how they work, how they practice, what new methodologies they might want to develop, what collaborations they might be interested in looking at. And the evolution of that as a way of working, where it's kind of non-extractive commissioning for my gallery space based, was very much informed not only by ultimology but also by a kind of ecological consciousness that it turns out I do have. And it became sort of something I thought would be useful and could be a good methodology for independent curatorial practice in a broader way within the ecosystem and ecology of the visual arts in Ireland. And so we were able to incorporate as a very official company, limited by guarantee. So it's now Kunstverein Projects, CLG is the official kind of entity or legal structure. And within that, we run another program called the Creative Producer Program, where we're working with and training 6 independent creative producers to try to build a network of creative producers in Ireland and encourage them to work in ways with artists that are sustainable for their own practices. So not necessarily mirroring what I do, but kind of adapting what they do to kind of fit with the current infrastructures and become the glue between production and presentation, or artworks and publics, or institutions and art centres, or futures and pasts and things like that. And that's very much informed by a kind of sense of wanting to commit to sustainability, not just of like my practice, but of their practices, and not just of their practices, but of the wider arts ecology. We're also doing, taking steps and measures that are kind of about institution building, where we're incorporating ideas around sustainability and sustainable thinking into the policies that we're creating as an institution. So, for example, our procurement policy has a clause in it that we'll go for a local producer of food rather than buy loads of food in Tesco to feed our producers when we're on a trip or something like that. Also, if we're taking a trip, we'll take a leaf out of Leon Bell's book and travel overland and not fly. We're going to the Netherlands in June next year for 10 days, and we're going through the UK on buses and boats. And that's quite a commitment when it comes to like 8 people traveling. It's a commitment of time by the people. It's a huge commitment of investment because it's way more expensive to do that than to fly. But it also gives us so much in return. The reward is, I'm hoping, will like vastly outweigh the costs, and the sort of building of network and infrastructure will be incredibly useful. Saying that it costs more, I think, is a really good note maybe for me to end on. We incorporate ideas around sustainability and an ecological consciousness in our budget. If there's a flight for the programme of Kunstverein Aughrim, for example, we flew CA Conrad over from London when they were there, rather than flying them from America. So kind of trying to be realistic and practical, and waiting for people to be near you and then bringing them closer, and working with artists who live within a kind of reasonable radius where flights aren't an issue all the time. But we brought CA over and figured out how much that cost, and then used the carbon offset calculator tool to figure out how much we should tax ourselves. And we tax ourselves for activities that we undertake that do have a kind of energy cost to them. We tax ourselves on it, and we have a line in our budget to put that funding for this strategic climate fund that we're building, that goes back into projects that we endorse that are more positive and less costly in terms of energy. It can be something as simple as like buying pollinators in collaboration with our local Tidy Towns faction and planting them outside the Kunstverein, or putting money into having organic and sustainably sourced products, or it can be bigger, like supporting causes that are ecologically motivated. So from the and also we work with a brilliant technician called Shane Malone Murphy. He's also an artist, and one thing we wanted to do at an early stage of developing the idea of the institutional parameters of Kunstverein Aughrim was to have a sustainability policy. So we commissioned Shane to write that policy for us, and he undertook a short course with amazing Siobhan O'Sullivan
And with me.
and you about sustainable exhibition making, and we commissioned him to do that, and then based on that he used Kunstverein Aughrim as a case study and wrote us a really kind of responsive and specific and bespoke sustainability policy before we began, pretty much. And so that's where our carbon offset fund and strategic climate fund and all the things come from. And also gives us links to easier steps and organisations and people and resources that I wouldn't naturally have, or even have the capacity to like search for. So from sort of bigger thinking and ideological thinking and practice-based measures to very, very simple, like helping bees in Aughrim. I guess that a kind of ecological consciousness permeates the structures that I hope to shape and build and evolve.
It's very interesting. You should make public more all of this information. All of us. And the strategic fund is a very interesting structure that probably it should be way more expanded from people. Thank you very much. I would move towards something like slightly different, and to Siobhan, and more like instead of talking about strategic fund for the climate that institutions can have, and it's very interesting, and everything else has been said, I wanted to shift the focus slightly and talking about the work. And my question for you would be that often the climate discourse remain metaphorical, and it's about speaking about ecologies, as been mentioned, and instead of being a transformative practice. And I wanted to know, regarding your work and your research, how can we resist to the tendencies of environmental team becoming symbolics rather than systemic? What is your point of view on this? And what if maybe both are needed? And you are an independent curator, so it's a different way of working. And how is your point of view in navigating the space between institutions and the demands, and at the same time the demands of a climate focus practice? What is your point of view and base of your work, if you can tell us?
Thanks, Christina, and thanks, Kate and Viviana as well. It's really interesting. Just to say, initially when Christina asked me to do this, I tried to retract my invitation. I was like, I'm not an expert on ecology or curating, and I was like, this is, anyway, I'm here now, and it's something I'm obviously very interested in, and it is also, my profession. But so I'm just going to talk through your question in terms of some of the work that I've dealt with this year, basically, I think. I'm just going to start off as well by just saying that nature is something that obviously I've always been deeply interested in. In my household, I grew up with it everywhere. There was like a woods surrounding my house, and from my parents, I developed this deep respect for nature, and it was really important. Nature was this it was very innate in everything they did, and so I got this. And respect, I think, is the right word as well. It's very it's something that you listen to, that you work with, that you work around, and enjoy, of course. First of all, I'm the co-curator of Earth Rising, which is an ecology and climate change festival that happens in Niamh once a year in September. And so I started that in 2022. And I was really excited to do it because I hadn't really worked in that field before in terms of environment and ecology and climate change and things like that. But it's something I thought about personally a lot. So I hadn't worked in it formally, I suppose. And I'm only really starting my formal journey into ecology, I think. I was always very in school and in college I did arts, and it was all very arts. And to me, nature and ecology was a science subject. And I didn't do science past first year. So it wasn't something that I thought I would ever, I don't know, just working in that sense. I guess I had this weird fear of science things because I always felt a bit like it wasn't my sphere or whatever. But anyway, when I started working in Niamh on this, it was it just really made sense. I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. So I started on that in 2022. And the very first year of Earth Rising, there was a load of artists involved, 80 or 90 artists, I think, and it was totally chaotic. And it was there was a real lot of artists there that mightn't have been in Niamh ordinarily, or that kind of work might not have been shown. So it was really exciting in that sense. There was a lot of, it felt really grassroots, real DIY. There was people bringing things that, just really sparked conversations and created this lovely network that, had existed, I think, but maybe brought more people into the fold a little. For myself, definitely, it really broadened. It brought this whole new set of people into my life that still weave through everything I do in terms of work and college and things like that. These people pop up everywhere, and I have learned so much from them. And for me, it is really about learning, even reading through applications and stuff like that. It's incredible, the depth of knowledge and research that artists are doing in this field. So that was the first year, and then 22, 23, 24, with similar, loads of artists, really amazing work being done within IMA over the course, like 2 or 3 or 4 days. And then this year we changed how it was run. So instead of having like 80 artists, we chose 4 projects, but there was we kind of wanted it to be more sustainable, I guess. We wanted it to have a longer lead-in time. We wanted every project to work with a community group and an environmental group. We wanted sustainability to shape the production and the structure of the projects and not just the theme, you know? So we really wanted people to... we ourselves wanted to engage more with the projects as they were developing as well. To see how they were happening, and that was amazing this year. We did a lot of that. In other years, you know, all this work was going on, but when it came to the weekend of Earth Rising, it was very much bringing a project and putting it up, and that was, you know, IMA, or the structure we had in place, didn't allow for anything much beyond that. It was very much, this is what you'll see in the space, and you can carry forward if you want in other ways, but you know, I think this year with the projects we brought in, you could really see the work that was put in before that, or you could see the communities that were engaged with, because a lot of them were there, you know, like a lot of people that the 4 projects engaged with were there. So I might just go into the projects briefly. So one of the first projects that we had was Dinshanikis, who were, they kind of sprung from Home Tree in Ennistimon. They were, Dinshanikis, the project itself was funded by Creative Ireland, and so this was a group of 11 artists who were all sent into the uplands, into these rural areas that were suffering from depopulation, both of like people and ecology and species and things like this. So they were all sent into like super rural locations and sent off basically to see what they could do, how they could engage with this topic. And I'm just going to read you the brief that they were given by Home Tree. It was: listen to communities, facilitate conversations and workshops, engage with difficult themes of biodiversity loss, agricultural policy and practice, and supports an envisioning process that elevates the voice of the communities themselves. And I think they did this amazingly well. So they really, like I say, they really brought people on board in a massive, I'm not going to go into too many details about the different projects, but in a load of different ways. So one of the artists worked in the Borla region, the Borla Mountains in West Cork, and what he did, he did this really great kind of workshop. One of the things he did was a workshop where he had stories from all these older people from the area and had other people lip sync to them and made these videos of like these young people but with these gorgeous stories coming out of their mouths, you know. And it was really effective. It sounds really simple, but it was really beautiful. And another one was Roisin de Butler, who was based up in Donegal. She brought a project called Farmgate, and she had that in the centre of the courtyard, and it was she had brought that to the ploughing championship and other events around Ireland where people kind of leaned against the gate and kind of met, and it was a social place like for farmers, for communities. It was gorgeous, you know. So that's just 2 of the examples of what they brought. But there was 11 artists with 11 projects, so there was like, and some of the artists were doing 2 or 3 different things. So there was a load going on. So that was Dinshanikis. Another project was with Lisa Fingleton, who's I don't know if I'm sure a lot of people know Lisa Fingleton. She's a bit of a force. She's kind of she's a farmer. She's an activist. She's an artist. She's based in Kerry. She's been at it for years. She was at Earth Rising a few times. I remember 2 or 3 years ago she brought like 30 farmers up from West Kerry to experience the weekend. You know, she's so what she did was a project called Brilliant Ballybunion, which again I think was a Creative Ireland project initially. So 2 of the things that she focused on through that in the community in terms of nature and was she ran a festival called the Ballybunion Bean Festival, which was talking about beans. It was a festival around the importance of beans. as a food source and so much more, but for now and for our future, you know, as a sustainable way of nurturing ourselves and our soil and everything. And one of the other things she worked on loads of things for this project, I'm just going to talk about two, was the ring plover project, which was a group set up to like physically monitor and protect nesting ring plovers on the Long Strand in Ballybunion. So there was someone like around the clock minding these birds that were nesting because they're like endangered, and it was just like really beautiful. And yeah, so that there was a lot of engagement with those projects. I'm just going to briefly mention another project called Interface, who are based in Ina up in Connemara, and their project was all about wind turbines and proposed wind turbines in Scader Rocks, which is just off Carna. And so in between the project was called Bearing Witness. In between being accepted and Earth Rising, it didn't happen. They said they weren't going to put the wind farms there, but Interface, like from the start, they dealt with it in a really interesting way. They talked about, you know, how a lot of people in the community perceive them as like not in my backyard, or not in the community, but in general, you know, this kind of attitude, and just talking about like the legitimate importance of like marine biodiversity and the ecology of the area, and it really engaged with people. There was a lot of workshops, a huge amount of talks. They were there, you know, like 10 hours a day talking to people. It was amazing. And then the last project was called Skate and Forage, and that was Samuel Arnold Keane and Alida Marquez. So Samuel is a forager. He's been foraging for years. He runs these courses. He's great. He's also a skater. And he came up with this idea of skating and foraging your way up to Imma on the Saturday and Sunday of the festival. So they met at Temple Bar Square, and they just he had planned out a route, obviously, of really good places to forage, because he knows Dublin really well, and engaged like in different communities along the way of people he knew and things like that. So it took them around maybe 2.5 hours to get from Temple Bar up to Imma. And yeah, I couldn't go, obviously, because I was fairly busy, but and then it ended in a workshop up in Imma, and they made this huge map of what they'd done, and the map was made up of different materials they'd found and different things they'd foraged and places they'd gone, and like it was just gorgeous. And it only around 24 people in total got to experience that, but I think when we were publicising it, it really captured people's imagination, because people don't think about urban foraging that much, or you know, it really seemed to, like, people seemed to latch onto it. So to kind of answer your question a little bit more, I was thinking the metaphor kind of reshapes reality, and sometimes the poetic and the speculative opens like the emotional and imaginative spaces. And I think what these projects did, I think the projects kind of did this really well, both in their communities and in their presentation in Imma and on the lead up. And anyone who engaged with them could see the passion there, and the same with the communities. I think they're all kind of still working with these, even though the funding has run out. I think they're finding it really hard to like disentangle themselves from these gorgeous communities that they've embedded themselves into, and like all these farmers and all these different people of all ages that they've worked with so closely. Also, I think what I've seen over the years in Earth Rising, and all the many different artworks, which there's been so many of all different kinds, is that when someone encounters work that makes them like feel the fragility of like a certain ecosystem or the interconnectedness of a species, that it really kind of, it works in a way that kind of motivates behavioral change, and in turn can be systemic, you know. So I guess that's kind of the question, you know. It's like you were talking about the metaphorical or the practical, and I think that's kind of what it does. And then just the second half of the question, just very briefly, as I do work as an independent curator, and in terms of ecology, most of the work I've done so far has been with Imma. Imma's Earth Rising is now turning into biennial structure, so there won't be any next year, it'll be the year after. So I'm also doing a course in NCAD, Art and Ecology, which is like the best thing I've ever done. The first day I walked in there, I was like, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. It's all outdoors, it's in the field. If anyone's looking for a course to do, my God, do it. Don't overpopulate. It's so good. Christina did it too. Like it's changed. It's completely changed my outlook as a human being, as a curator. It's really sparked something in me. Something I'm so excited now about the next few months, the next few years, and working in this different way. Like, yeah, it's really amazing. But institutionally. As to the question, institutionally, definitely, you rub up artists and the institution rub against each other the wrong way a lot of the time, and I've had to kind of deal with that a lot over the years, especially in my kind of weird space of not being Emma, not being an artist, this kind of, agent, this middle person. But I think it does make you have to sit in a kind of interesting place between these slow adapting institutions and the more experimental urgent climate practices that you're kind of dealing with. So it is, and it also helps. What I'm really looking forward to is the bringing of people together. I think it's something that as an independent curator, I think maybe you can do more than when you are working for an institution or a large institution. At least you're kind of doing it on your own terms. You can work more rurally, bring the urban and the rural together. Academic research, artivist movements, communities, bringing them all together, like opening up the field. It kind of like what you're doing here as well, that kind of way of planning events that is slow and steady and interspersing the practical with the theoretical. You've got workshops, you've got an exhibition, you've got these talks, and they're very open, they're kind of democratic, they're recorded. It's just it's a nice way of doing it, I think, this long form, and it's a way we need to get back to. And I'll just stop there. Yeah, great. Okay.
Sorry. That's brilliant, and it's everything that you described is exactly, this is exactly what I'm happy you are here to tell us this, because you are representing this, change, and we have different powers, different opportunities, and so thank you very much.
No problem.
I am now moving slightly toward artists. We thank you very much, our curators, and I would like to. I have a few questions for the other side and to the artists, and I would like to start with Vanya. Well, we have mentioned before how interesting and important is thinking about the end with Kate. So I'm asking you, because this is a very important part as well of your process way of thinking. In your practice, exactly, you embrace decay, transformation, drawing your fungal thinking, that is amazing, to rethink waste and values. In a cultural field that offer world visibility once again, novelty, permanence that we were mentioning multiple times, how do you reconcile those pressures as an artist in your artistic language rooted in decomposition and slow change? And if you can please talk about your practice and explain why I'm asking this. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. And it's going to sound a lot like me after all that really expansive practice, so I will try and keep it succinct. My notes are like my brain, like all over the place, and it's very full. And one of the things I suppose that contributes to that is the fact that I'm doing this really slow but really broad research into fungi, which is a queendom so vast and so integral and integrated into our lives that it's, as you know, if you press the fungal button on me, it doesn't stop. So I will try and keep it concise. And I suppose one of the things I wanted to start with is I teach full-time. So my practice as an artist is quite limited, but actually that really suits the way. So it actually, it's not because of my work as a lecturer that I practice that way. It's actually, I practice that way anyway. It's really slow and really, I suppose, a lot of it is research and a lot of it is really slow observation. And I will give you some examples of that in a minute. But that's quite difficult to do in, as you said, in an emergency or when there's urgency. But when it comes to working with fungi and mushrooms and yeasts and molds and decay, I think there's nothing more important than taking our time, because we know incredibly little. We know a fraction, which is on one side incredibly humbling, because it's nice to not know something, for a change, or be humbled by the fact that we actually don't know it all, and we don't have all the solutions, and we haven't figured it all out, and that we have to approach in a new way. It's only been kind of established as a queendom or kingdom or queerdom or whatever you want to call it since the 1970s, and I suppose with the technology developing in terms of microbiology and kind of lenses and kind of microscopes and photography at a different level, there's things opened up for mycology. But if you look at it now, even in Ireland, there is not a course you can take in mycology as such. So there's it's quite mysterious, which actually is also really beautiful in terms of our approach to it. We have a new way of approaching something. We don't have to do what we did with plants and animals. They don't fall into those kind of brackets. They're, as I would have said to you before, they're incredibly anarchic and which is incredibly joyful for me to watch. But anyway, back to my kind of practice, I suppose, in terms of that, then I live quite close to the woods. So I would think of that as an extension of my studio. So these really slow observations, which take years. It's more about getting to know, and not necessarily on a scientific level, although also, I dabble. But it's about relationship, and it's about getting to know, but not necessarily by knowing all their names or which ones are edible. I'm actually, I might know a few, but that's not my interest. It's not about kind of how might we use them. I'm trying to retrain or reframe for myself how I approach things. So that doesn't necessarily mean that how can I use it? How can I make the most of this? How can I, use it for our human uses? It's more like, how do they live, and who are they? What is their temperament? How do they approach something in a way that I might learn from? So I was doing a residency in Leitrim Sculpture Centre, the Lear residency, which is wonderful, but it's finished now. But it's a landscape and ecology research residency, which is a fantastic opportunity to do all the things that I'd love doing. So for that, the woods were part of that. My compost heap was part of that. I did a lot of different fermentation processes. So processual thinking, and maybe I should add before that the reason why I came to fungi was because I was looking at system thinking. So it wasn't actually, even though I lived beside the woods and I was already kind of immersed in that, it was actually true kind of more theoretical thinking around systems and kind of how we function in society and how we relate and interact or not. That kind of brought me to kind of how we connect and in different ways, or how can we better connect. So then going from system thinking, which I found quite limiting in some ways, but did shift my mind into new ways of approach. And with the residency in Leitrim, it really allowed me to take another kind of step into kind of thinking of everything as process, which is quite mind-boggling, and I can't do it all the time because it's just, you can't function, right? But in terms of kind of death and decay, for me, no longer exist as an endpoint. They are just, it's just this constant flux of everything, interacting, as Karen Barat would say, in terms of that kind of constant flow, and sometimes these moments, perhaps, of some stability, but before kind of heading off, or entropy kind of getting to them, and it slowly kind of dissolving into something else. So compost was a really, really good companion in that. I enlisted the help of rotting processes in my studio to kind of, I suppose, create visibility around these things. So I'd have my studio is full of jars, and it doesn't smell, although sometimes it can. But it is it's like a lab, but it's not, because I don't approach it necessarily in a very scientific way. It's more about kind of these slow observations, again, about getting to know them. And they are often molds rather than mushrooms, or yeast, or other rotting processes, such as retting. But I also might get some inoculated grain and, work with oyster mushrooms. This is a really tricky one, and which is why I'm, in a way, really happy to not be an artist that has to produce anything as such, which might sound like a cop-out, and I have these constant internal debates as well. But for me, that slowness and that kind of observation are so important that it actually, I can't necessarily make in that way. It's about companionship. So the very odd time I might get to show something, it might be those fungi rotting the paper, which is, I call them rotting drawings. So they end up kind of leaving a trace, and they're living. Right? There's not many places that will take a living rot into their gallery. So, and that's okay with me. If I've resigned myself to that, that's not, that part, that observation, that relationship is more important than producing. I also find it quite difficult to produce, because I don't want to add to that kind of ever ongoing kind of making and producing that the art world, is kind of nearly trapped in, right? And kind of the material elements that I'm describing here are one part of it. The other part then is more about kind of using that fungal thinking in helping me rethink lots and lots of other things, right? So, and I'm sure you're all familiar with Anna Tsing's Mushroom at the End of the World and the Matsutake research group. Michael Hathaway is a fantastic writer of What a Mushroom Lives For. Great book. It's the second one in that series from the research group. And I should have brought it, but I was coming from Sligo and I had to live.
The information really spread to everybody.
And I have sent on quite a long piece of writing by two lecturers and writers on myco-aesthetics. So myco being mycology, and I suppose how now mycology and kind of fungal thinking is kind of taking over in terms of that kind of cultural. It's well integrated at this stage. It wasn't 10 years ago when I started thinking about this. That has good and bad sides, in the sense that, all of a sudden we all know that tech is not going to save us, but now there's this surge of, mushrooms are going to save us. And it's not. They're not, right? If you think about it, we all know that. But there is this kind of graw for an easy fix, and a fast fix. So one of the projects I've been on for the last year was on Rathlin Island, a future island project, which was actually a design project. Not for us, though. We were the outliers. We were two artists and a naturalist on the island. I don't live on Rathlin, but I've worked with them remotely, and then went to visit a couple of times around mycoremediation. So using fungi to help clean soil or kind of remediate ecosystems. But we didn't necessarily look at that. We looked at the ethics around using fungi and in a very broad sense, where this incredibly human-centric approach to everything that we kind of go near, this all-consuming, all-co-opting, and trying to obviously make money and kind of save money, and kind of in a lot of the literature described in the article I've sent on, they talk about this endless source, and you can create materials from mushrooms, you can create energy, there's medicine, there's endless applications, but without knowledge, which is really dangerous. So it's this funny kind of position to be in where, part of my practice is about talking and kind of engaging. So I often do an open studio where I can, and bring basically all the processes that I'm working with. So, the compost and the retting processes and the rotting ones, and kind of have conversations with people. And that can be in an old shop, or it can be in my own studio, or it can be at an event. And that's really central. But at the same time, I feel really protective over them, because I also know how these things can kind of take a run and get co-opted. And then where will we be if we do this unknowingly? So, which is why slowness and observation and getting to know are so important. I've not used my notes whatsoever. I don't know where I am. But actually, I will look at the question includes visibility, novelty, and permanence. And obviously, my work is incredibly impermanent, and, or actually, permanence in terms of process. So once they might stop rotting, that doesn't mean they get chucked out of the studio. They might still be rotting without being visible in that sense. I have a pumpkin that's on the go for about 3 years, and it won't go away. Which is wonderful. It has had this incredible white hair, like a full Einstein look, to now being nearly ceramic. It's hollow, for all I know. This is like Schrodinger's cat, But it is an endless source of kind of fascination in terms of that kind of processual, kind of this constant ongoingness, as Haraway would say, and this becoming and unbecoming have become these central parts of my thinking, and they help in overcoming some of the quite desperate things that we might come up, when we're thinking about climate. And it includes deep time, because time is obviously a really big part of this. And reapproaching things. So for me, that is a lot of reading, talking, and creating a sensitivity. I call it tuning, but there's lots of words for it. But it's tuning into something that you might not have language for. For instance, we have very little language around fungi. We use mostly plant or animal language, which is, very limiting. You could say wrong, but we culturally we will catch up. But I'm really curious how that will form, how we can influence that in a way that doesn't necessarily follow the same path. And I was listening to a podcast by Aughrim about the third way, which is wonderful because it kind of, for me, ties into this, because, fungi being the third kingdom or queendom, and allowing us a really new frame. And in a way, I feel I'm short, it's incredibly hard to talk about fungi without being general. And of course, you can't be general around something that broad, that completely encompasses it. Is that my time up? Yeah.
Yes, we need to do some space for the questions.
Absolutely.
I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. I told you had to stop me. Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm finished. You were asking.
No, I'm done. No, because it's endless. No.
I mean, we know. We studied talk. Let's talk for 30 minutes, which was 2 hours. I need to leave. So thank you very much. It's extremely fascinating, and especially considering how visibility, time, expectations. This is very very different way of working.
That sometimes ends up in a book or booklet, and that's about the extent of my output. But that's okay.
That's okay. Exactly.
That's a lot. Collected.
I would like now to pass to Katherine, and I would say that we were talking about this complexity, and at the same time the system thinking and understanding how we are all connected, dependent, and in your practice, you explore something that is very part of every system, that is disturbance, repair, and specifically the boundaries between human and more than human. So my question was, how do you think that there is a danger in the current aesthetic that we are talking about, a different way of doing art, aesthetic of ecological art, and that it can render crisis poetic? That could be somehow, I don't know, there is a thing going on. I mean, there is a problem. Poetic rather than political. Mm-hmm. And how do you keep the urgency, if you want to keep urgency, within your material language, and if you can give a context, of course, about your work.
Thank you. And it's actually really amazing to be part of the panel, because I've really enjoyed the various iterations of this over the course of the year. I haven't been to every single one, but I have really think this is an amazing set of events that you've organised, Christina. And it's just been really fascinating to listen to everyone so far. Have I got one left after me? And I left some books over there on the table, and I have some little kind of discarded tools. So they're kind of brain mistake tools that I just thought might actually be quite fun to... I mean, they really are. They're things that kind of exploded and melted, and that actually make the sound as well, which is most odd. And what they are failures, in fact. So it's like that Beckett thing of fail again and fail better. But at the same time, what happens is, for me, with these kinds of mistakes that I will hand around, thank you. I'll just take, so I'll put the other one over. That they just, then I'm not giving them to you really as a sort of as anything aesthetic. In fact, it kind of keys into what you're talking about. But they are, what they are to me, they're pieces of ceramic that I thought I could thread some copper through to make it stand up, to take a form that ceramic doesn't really actually want to take, and it certainly doesn't want to be heated up in that form. It wants to kind of flop, even when it's dry or whatever. So I suppose by way of introducing my practice, this is a kind of an example of how I try and I just have this energy in my work and in my life. Actually, I have to admit that it's in my relationships as well, and everything that I do with the world. It's to find out where the boundaries are and where the collapse is, or where it doesn't work anymore, or how far can that go. And it's about curiosity as well. I mean, maybe it's not as gentle as I would like it to be, but I'm learning to be gentle, and obviously, once you have a child, you're actually going to learn that very quickly. And anyway, so with this copper lattice, the copper actually kind of melted into these kind of, they weren't really tubes, they were sort of like, I suppose, ceramic branches. And it transformed it kind of into a rock, like it transformed the ceramic into a different material. And of course now I know that I'm like a kiln destroyer. Thank God someone gave me a free kiln recently, because at least I can't, I'm not destroying anybody else's kiln. So I've made these kind of separate kiln shelves now that really, that's that kind of like nappies, it's like they kind of have to get in the way, and that's kind of, they absorb the sort of the danger and the the risk factor, let us say. So I guess I didn't write in the bio any background at all, so I thought I should maybe just say that I was born in Paris. I don't know if I did say that, but anyway, I did. Okay. And growing up in Australia actually had the effect that I grew up in the city, but I would go to the country, and I had this sort of sense that, humans were not at all central to the whole question of existence. And so that kind of, what a great impact to have growing up, just that amazing land that is, that, you don't see civilization at every turn. And then you do see trees that will just kind of ossify and become these kind of skeletal forms, and transform what you consider the shapes of life might be. And if you have it early on, then it kind of, that's your assumption about the shapes of possible life. So, but then there was also another piece in that, that I can just kind of bring out now, which was that I would be in the middle of the desert, and there would be a wire sticking out of the ground, and for my imagination, that just had this weird effect that, obviously it's not the case, but as a kind of curious individual, and one that is sort of, is like, how far does that wire go? Like, is it going to the center of the earth? Is it sort of like, is the whole place wired here? It's curious, it's kind of whimsical, but at the same time, it kind of resonated as a sort of a poignant beginning to a way of thinking, and a way of, approaching a kind of recognition of what humans are on the planet, and, how we are positioned here. And, that was before kind of, questions like what our responsibilities are and things like that. So, but that would be kind of like the physical background, I guess. I mean, there was one other very small piece where I would, as a child, my mother would be writing a lecture, and I would sit at the far end of the beach. Well, she would kind of still be able to see me, and be digging in the clay where the sand ends, and I would make these little people. I was about 3 or 4. And for some reason, I had to make these little people, and I then found some rocks that I could grind up and add water to. And it's just things that, I think, I have no idea about reincarnation, but honestly, why would you do that? And, I was an only child, so there wasn't a kind of sibling or an aunt or anything floating around. Anyway, it's just things that you do, and you can think back, everybody's childhood is like that. Why was I doing that, So that's sort of a little bit where the ceramic came from, but I also work in a lot of other materials. Ceramic is actually incredibly recent. It's only the last couple of years that has just kind of come back. And so then, I'll try and go quickly with this little bit, that I lived in England and studied theatre design as a way to sort of support myself as an artist. That actually kind of gave me an idea that perhaps I could cheat with materials a little bit and be a little bit radical and kind of guerrilla about it. And then I kind of came back from that, so that there's a sort of hybridizing of that a little bit, but it was definitely had an effect on my aesthetic, as well as sort of, it kind of helped me technically as well. Then I would have moved to Edinburgh, and I was with the Richard DeMarco Gallery there for a while, and we did forays into Eastern Europe, which, I mean, the wall had come down by then. It was the early 90s, but it was still very resonant and redolent and sort of an incredibly interesting, important place. And I would have learnt about theatre of the dead, in fact, sort of post-war theatre by Tadeusz Kantor. That would have really adjusted my aesthetic. Dead Class is a particular theatre production where he was very much not into allowing expressivity, just everything was just absolutely mortified, and I mean, with good reason, like when you think of Poland and the Second World War, I mean, so, but it inculcates you, it gets into part of your own fabric, that kind of thing, and it kind of linked in with the trees in the desert, and just these things kind of, you kind of look at them later and go, how did all that stick together? But, and then I went and studied in France, and I was trying to find a way to actually talk about the work, because whenever I was asked a question, I wasn't able really to answer. I would get all kind of choked up and try to figure out a response, and but I didn't want to get too theoretically bound, the way that an artist can be stuck into the theory so much that it can actually hinder you quite easily. And so you have to be light and kind of dive, and then, whatever. You have to get your momentum around the theory. And this was interesting because I was interested in psychoanalysis, and I studied under a writer called Hélène Cixous, who would have done a lot of psychoanalytic-based literary theory. So she and a lot of the other philosophers that were around at the time, Derrida, would have been a one that I would have gone to a lot of the lectures of, but I was reading a lot of it as well. Erigare and obviously Julia Kristeva, and I would have gone to her lectures as well. And so it kind of helped open up where I was coming from, because it was a very psychological place that my work was deriving from, and still is. So that's a bit of the history, and then I came to Ireland, and I couldn't do work for about 4 years because it was really strange. It was like there wasn't enough pressure somehow. That there wasn't the pressurization that you get when you're living in a big city like Paris, and I then kind of couldn't really. Well, what happened? So I'm just trying to sort of evolve this very rapidly into the current practice that I have, which is that I was trying to kind of take apart a bathroom, and this plumbing just spewed out, and I realised that actually it's part of our living system, and it's an extension of our bodies in lots of ways. And so that's how the kind of porous boundaries between the human and the non-human bodies kind of came into me needing to reckon with that. That was my thing that I really needed to not be terrified by, because I found it actually quite horrifying. It was like, and I took a photograph of this sort of evident thing of this plumbing, because the builder couldn't take it down because the plumber had to be waited for because it was going to spurt everywhere. And so there was all this kind of like pressure kind of like there lurking just in front of me. And So that kind of made me think, so where do humans begin and end? And is it with our senses, or, can I extend into the chair and feel me sitting on it? Just funny things like that. Or do our technologies and our prosthetics, including wheelchairs and diggers and buildings, and the infrastructure around us, like lights and, water and, boiling the kettle, and AI as well, does that actually extend our bodies? That's our reach, isn't it? And obviously, the very extractive reach. Then another just sort of aspect, or just sort of a few reflections on the porous boundaries between the human and the non-human. Are we actually extensions of the planet? So it kind of feeds a little bit into being part of being nature. Are we actually, is life and obviously human beings kind of implicated in part of that, the senses of the planet being and the planet's body. So that was just a question that I am proposing to the group, but also that sort of is a driving kind of question in my work. So then there's also this other odd thing about what are we as conscious beings? And, I read a letter that somebody wrote, and I can't even remember now who wrote it, to somebody else in a book, as one does. Anyway, I should have written it down at the time. But it's like as if our consciousness is kind of the janitor in a building, like a block of flats where there's all these things going on inside the flats, but our consciousness only really actually gets to hear about what's going on when there's something kind of like some kind of rupture or some kind of issue or something that needs fixed, or, a drive, like a hunger or something like that, And so it's just interesting to kind of think of this amazing kind of assemblage of ourselves that we really haven't got, consciousness of, in fact. These wild, thriving communities of bacteria I have written here, and viruses and protists within us that survive and flourish even when we're sick and become compost. So then just this last little bit, and I guess that weirdness about our perception of what is really going on is what keeps me curious and floundering and needing to make sense of it all through the material and through finding out how thinkers critically deal with it. So that's kind of the machine of my practice in some ways. So then your question of do you think there's a danger in the current aesthetics of ecological art that it can render crisis poetic rather than political? And I guess when you look at poetic and poesis, is its origin in Greek, and it's about emerging new structures. And so I suppose my instant gratification argument is, political change has to start with poesis. So, but that's just one way of reading that. There is that feeling that one gets with quite sensationalizing art that will sensationalize an issue and, make it something quite scary, palatable. And that can always be, it's kind of a superpower of the artist to be able to have the choice around how far you go and what you're trying to do and what side you're trying to land on and what you actually need out of making this artwork as well. There is a driving force, as everybody's been talking about with the art world, pushing you to ta-da, and, whether it's to do new things all the time, whether it's to the only way you're going to get out of Ireland is by doing stuff that's kind of multicolored and loud and video-ish or whatever, or not. It's just, that just came out of my head then, but but it can be like there's a lot of pressure, you know, that that comes and can be quite damaging in some ways, because it does stress you out to the artist, but it's also kind of limiting the experimentation, the experimental side of the process and the practice. So shut up. Yeah.
No,
Sorry.
Apologies.
No.
It's just that everybody kind of took a bit longer, and we need.
That's
to,
great.
It's brilliant, and actually it gives us exactly the cue for the question that I was planning to ask me, because. It's like this necessity to push, necessity to show more than actually do, and especially what it was said before regarding the institutions. So my question was, and you know, because you all knew my questions, you do confront greenwashing, you do confront what is the political power regarding the situation that we are in, and how sustainability is a branding tool very often, and how it's quite, let's face it, it's quite hard to do many of the things that we are all talking about sometimes. And so from your perspective, how artists critically engage with this narrative without being absorbed by them and or silenced by the dependency on institutional support, because, you know, we kind of all depend on fundings, and sometimes, you know, it's not easy. And you definitely thought about it, and many of your work, not only artistic, strictly artistic work, is about this. If you can, please, and close. And apologies, we will not have time for questions.
I'll start off by saying thank you, everyone, so far, for all your patience, and thank you to everyone on the panel as well. It's really an honor to be in this lineup, learning lots and lots and lots, and like really enjoying all the references so far, and hearing like Katherine Yusof and so forth. She's like a huge reading for me. But yes, speaking about greenwashing, I was trying to figure out how to answer your question, because it's massive in terms of, I think it came up in one of the earlier questions about this idea of refusal, you know, so like refusing to engage with the institution, but then when do you have access to that? Who has access to that in terms of, do we have other means of kind of supporting the art practice with funding or otherwise? And I guess I've kind of split my practice in like a few different ways. And so one of them is I have done quite a few kind of large institutional projects, and I was going to talk about at least one of those in terms of greenwashing specifically, but maybe to highlight as well, I lecture in the School of Architecture in Limerick, and we do a lot of projects. We have actually worked with Home Tree as well, so lots of similarities. And we do a project about the future of the Shannon Estuary, and so part of that is also having students think radically about climate futures and climate crisis within Ireland, thinking about that in terms of what types of futures do we want to see, do we want to bring into being, how are those things connected to, yes, kind of like these languages of greenwashing. And I think in my practice, I think a lot about semantics and the types of languages that we're allowed to use around the climate. Like, I was having an argument with my parents this morning because they're using the term climate change. And I was like, that's so passive. You know, the climate is changing all the time. In Ireland, the climate changes every, 10 minutes. Like, that's not what we're in the middle of, is a climate crisis. Like when we see what's happened in Jamaica just in the last few days, when we think about the Gulf Stream shutting down, when we see islands in Polynesia like Tuvalu that are literally sinking and falling apart and being digitized so that a citizenship and a sense of state can continue to exist, because the land itself does not exist. So kind of the language itself is really important. And so talking through students with that around what is climate crisis, what is climate justice, how are those things intersectional? In terms of being an artist in And then so that's one side of the practice is kind of lecturing in this sense and trying to work with students and young people in particular around different types of environmental anxiety. How do you maintain agency over that through kind of education and language? And then the other side is kind of, I do a lot of artist-run projects. So I run a radio show program thinking about the future with speculative fiction audio works. But I also am a member of an artist co-op in London, and we run lots of community-based projects. And while it's not specifically about the climate, I think a lot about the art of living well, sort of like, living well on a dying planet. And so one of those things is like, not feeling guilt about taking a flight. Mm-hmm. If we have people like Taylor Swift taking 30-minute flight journeys, like why do I as an individual feel all of the shame and guilt around taking this flight? But then also on the other side being like, okay, so if that's not within my capacity to change, what things are? And that would be things such as the type of foods I eat or the type of things I consume or the other forms of transport that I can take in my life. And so thinking about it as a rounded way. The project I want to talk about is I did the European Investment Bank's Artist Development Fund in 2020, which was a bizarre time. It started in June of 2020 and finished mid-July of 2020. We caught that brief window in Luxembourg when the borders were open. And one of the first things that I think, it was the theme of the residency was called The Imprint of Man. And I was interested in climate bonds, which are a type of financial structure for pooling money into renewable infrastructure projects. One of the first things I did in the residency was I asked if they would fund land-based travel to the residency. And thankfully, because I was coming from London at that point, I was able to get a train. And I had 3 different letters in English and French to prove that I was a protected worker, whatever the phrase was wearing a mask. I was the only person on the train from Brussels to Luxembourg. Incredibly bizarre experience. And then the whole residency itself was quite diffracted because was in a foreign city where like you couldn't embrace anyone. And so I ended up trying to communicate with bank employees to understand what was climate finance about. And I was in the middle of doing my master's and reading Donna Haraway, learning about ecology. I was really lucky to be in a reading group with this woman, Roz Gray, who runs the MA in Art and Ecology in Goldsmiths, with Haroon Morrison, who's another really amazing artist in London, also was part of that program for a while. And I had been doing research about economics and thinking about the languages of economics as being deliberately pushing you away from, so like a lot of economic language is in terms of formulas and algorithms, which many of us can't understand, but the scale of an economy directly impacts how much our groceries are. The type of lives we can live, kind of type of dignity we can live in our lives. So how do we bring that language into something that's kind of embodied or is physical or is material in some way that it comes out of the diffracted or the confusing. And so I started learning about ecology, and then I started to feel that about some of these ecological language where it's like, I love how Donna Haraway writes, but I find it impossible to engage with on a first reading. It's so poetic, it's beautiful, but you need a lot of time, and we don't all have that luxury. And so I was trying to find ways in which to bring those two types of languages together and to learn about, from a financial standpoint, how they view the environment. And those the bank employees were like, we're the good guys because we're putting our money into the environment and not into fossil fuels. And at the same point, there was a huge push by the European Investment Bank to switch funding that was being used on fossil fuels into renewable infrastructure, like wind turbines, like solar panels, like making electrical grids more productive. And so I was figuring out how to bring those two types of languages together while at the same time understanding that for me, the origins of climate crisis are colonial and are financial. One of the notes I wrote today was kind of the first financial crisis was the Dutch tulip trade in the 1600s, the collapse of the Dutch tulip trade. And the main question I have from that is, how did they have all that money to spend on those tulips? Mm-hmm. And of course, we have the spice trade and we have the East Indies Company, and it's deeply embedded in a colonial structure. You have Enlightenment sciences, which are European Enlightenment sciences, which are validating those forms of extraction. So I was thinking about all of this while making this work that later became Drafting Communications, Drafting Climate, Drafting Futures, which is a set of 6 fictional emails between this also touches on the non-human, the wind, and a fictional supranational organization called the Green Department of Protections, or for short, GDP. So I was trying to, and then I made a really kind of awful logo that had a wind turbine and a leaf, because that's what greenwashing is. We have our savior of the renewable infrastructure, and we have to make sure there's green there to show that, we're kind and friendly. And so in the email exchange is about the construction of a set of wind turbines in this made-up country called Draftia, based on the actual bank's draft running through the building. And more so about trying to, how do you have those two different valuations of the environment? How do they collapse within one another? And I was thinking about a few different types of indigenous wisdom, but I didn't want to plagiarize that, because I think there can be a fetishization in the contemporary art world around indigenous wisdom, especially ones that are not situated and not contextualized. And so instead, the wind was called Aesshi, after kind of Irish mythology. And the reason why it was an email exchange was partially so I could plagiarize the emails the bank employees were sending me. Some of the sign-offs are actually their sign-offs that they sent to me. But partially I was thinking about, how could the wind communicate? And I'm like, well, the wind could type, technically. And so there's this exchange around, where might you place a wind farm, and giving a set of sites, and the wind responding with, we can't have it on these sites because these are sacred sites. Or asking, can we have a precise map of the land? And the wind sends this very abstract photograph, because the wind doesn't view the land the way an organization would view the land. And even with students in the architecture school, I spent a lot of time asking them kind of, what's the experience of moving through the space? You have the knowledge, you have the policy documents, but you're not a politician. You're an architect, you're selling the idea of a space. In the same way as artists, we have this ability to think about how do we embody and embed ourselves within, admittedly, quite often very complex theory and critical thinking, so that it's something that you feel when you move into a world. The second project that I just want to touch really briefly on, because it also touches on that idea of language, and maybe it's a nice way to end on, is last year I finished a 2-year research project called Pulling Blood from a Stone with Science Gallery Berlin. And the basis of the project was imagining if rocks could speak, what would they say? How would they speak to one another? How would they speak to us? And let's say the bottom line of the research, why it felt so important to make that work, was when we think about, let's say, climate justice and a just climate transition that requires the mining of raw materials such as lithium, such as cobalt, such as gold. We understand that many of these materials are coming from contested sites. There's genocide happening in the DRC over cobalt, there's genocide happening in Sudan over gold. But these are the most important materials for decarbonizing electricity. And so trying to think that's kind of looking at the research of Katherine, of course, but also thinking about if we understood rocks in particular as not mute beings, but as beings that could speak to us, how might that change our relations with one another? Thinking about languages of geology as being inherently colonial and extractive. And so if we had different types of languages, how does that change our relationships with one another? And I think maybe in terms of environment more generally, it's also and comes back to this question about economic language. It's if we have different types of languages to speak with one another, how does that change our relationships with the environment? I speak a lot with friends who are very anxious about kind of the future in terms of, let's not think in scarcity, but let's think in abundance. I'm not going to be losing my ability to fly. I'm going to be gaining my ability to take a boat. I'm not going to be losing my ability to no longer eat mangoes. I'm going to be gaining my ability to have a garden. And trying to shift that perspective to something that, the slowness of a future is is a joyful thing. You know, the idea of sharing kind of, I mean, I'm in an artist co-op, so I love co-ops, but thinking about those forms of community and communal making and living as being kind of parts of those climate futures. And I guess I'm trying to make work that kind of facilitates some of those connections, some of those kind of ideological shifts that are not always directly about greenwashing per se, but it's like, if we have that language that is co-opted, how do we move it somewhere where we gain more agency again? I'll leave it at that. That's time.